Good afternoon. My name is Jessie Bond, and I am the city manager for the city of Mercer Island. This presentation is being recorded on February 4th, 2022, in advance of the February 15th, 2022 City Council meeting. This slide deck covers the PROS plan update and more specifically goes into detail on all of the capital projects that are proposed as part of the PROS plan update. Just a little background on this slide deck. A version of this presentation was originally presented to the Parks and Recreation Commission and the Open Space Conservancy Trust in early November. We didn't have a chance to present the whole presentation at that time, but the slide deck is posted to Let's Talk. And since then, we've built off that original slide deck. We've corrected a number of errors. We updated some cost estimates. And we also made some additional revisions as we headed into the handoff with the city council. So where those changes were made, we've noted it on the top right-hand corner of the slide, which may actually be blocked by this video box. But the PowerPoint in its entirety will be loaded to our Let's Talk page. So what is a PROS plan and why have we been spending so much time on it? This is a 6-year plan that anticipates the programming and capital infrastructure investments necessary to meet our community needs for a variety of services like parks, recreation, open space, trails, arts, and cultural events. We do have a PROS plan. Prior PROS plan, it expired in 2019. We began working on the PROS plan update at the end of 2019, but unfortunately had to suspend our work in early 2020 due to the pandemic. We picked it back up at the end of 2020, and we spent most of 2021 with the Parks and Recreation Commission, and later in the process with the Arts Council and the Open Space Conservancy Trust, finishing the plan update. Whoops. The PROS plan is strategic in focus, and it guides our long-term investments to make improvements to our parks and recreation system. It is based on community input, and I'll show you on the next slide a snapshot of our community engagement. It includes goals and objectives to guide our future decision-making, and it includes recommendations on future capital funding, which is really the focus of this presentation. And finally, and really importantly, this document, the adopted PROS plan, is what we need to be eligible to apply for state grants and other sources of revenue. Looking back, our public engagement included a number of touches. We have a Let's Talk project page that is still active. We hosted 2 virtual public meetings. We did 2 community surveys separated by almost a year. We had many Parks and Recreation Commission meetings. I have to think more than a dozen. We met with the Arts Council and the Open Space Trust, and then we're in front of the City Council now in the first quarter of 2022. So the important thing about the key dates section is that we are heading towards City Council adoption, and we have a deadline. To be eligible for state grants, we do have to adopt our plan no later than March. And by the way, if you're watching, I am actually recording this from home today, so there may be some background noise, dogs and kids, but that is what it is. Okay, so let's dive in now to the proposed Parks Capital Improvement Program. And we do have a lengthy slide deck ahead of us. I'm joined today by 2 of my colleagues, Paul West and Elaine Summergren, and they're gonna help me talk through a variety of projects. But first, let's talk about what a CIP is. CIP, we like our acronyms in city government, is a capital improvement program. It's the long-range plan to guide capital investments in public infrastructure. It is required for us to collect impact fees, and as I've already noted, it maintains our eligibility for state grants. Our projects that we select, are consistent with our vision, goals, and priorities identified in a variety of our city plans, including the city comprehensive plan. And generally what happens, and I'll show a graphic on this in just a moment, is the first 2 years of the adopted CIP informs the next 2-year budget. All right, this is really important. The CIP is not a budget, it's a plan, right? So it informs future budget decision, and it certainly sets about the priorities and the proposed timing for projects, but it does not actually budget the funds. There is another step that has to happen for these projects to become part of the budget. The park CIP is a required component of the PROS plan to maintain our grant eligibility. So that's why you're seeing it here as part of the PROS plan. So this is, and my video box is getting in the way a little bit, but this is a snapshot of part of the park CIP. It's actually, the full document is embedded in chapter 11 of the PROS plan. Again, that's posted on the city's Let's Talk page. So what you'll see here is you have a list of athletic field projects, beaches and shoreline projects, and a handful of the open space and trail projects. Our CIP starts in 2023 and goes out through 2028. That was by design because it lines up with the next budget cycle. And what I wanted to point out just graphically is once the CIP is adopted, it's the projects in 2023 and 2024 that we will move forward for consideration as part of the 23-24 budget. So we have a 6-year plan. It's 2 years worth of projects that then we will roll forward for consideration as part of our budgeting process. Okay. This will become a little more apparent as we talk about some of the projects more specifically, but it's important to remember that capital project planning has a long planning horizon. In fact, some of our projects can take 2, 3, 4 years or more. A good example right now is the Luther Burbank Dock project. When that's all said and done, that will be a 4 to 5 year project with from the start probably to the finish. And so that's why these 6-year plans are so important, because it allows us to ensure we have the resources, not just the funding, but the staffing and the consulting resources to support that project from start to finish. We also pay a lot of attention to sequencing. It's important that we don't have all of our projects in construction the same year or all of them in planning. So the plan takes all of that into consideration. And we also look for efficiencies, which I'll point out a couple places where we did this. So opportunities to combine projects where it may make sense to bring them together, just mobilize once or use one consulting team, particularly if it's specialized work. All right, so now we're going to just take a quick look at the revenue before we dive into the projects specifically. The first thing I just wanted to show here is this is a snapshot of the citywide CIP funds or the revenues available to support the CIP. When it comes to the parks, parks are funded out of the city's capital improvement fund. The revenue sources for parks projects include real estate excise tax, grants, other contributions, private contributions, state contributions. They can include property tax and debt service. The city's capital improvement plan funds open space, vegetation management, parks, and buildings. And I bring this up now because it's important to note that the CIP resources are shared between those things. So open space, parks, and all the city facilities. In other words, and I already said this, the resources are shared. And this is important because we do have a lot of infrastructure needs citywide right now. And so as we're considering funding these park projects, we also have to be aware of the needs we have in open space, trails, and at our city facilities. I've already talked about park CIP funding. We derive funds from a variety of places. Real estate excise tax is the primary driver of funding for parks capital projects. We also set aside fees on athletic field rentals into a sinking fund to help cover turf replacements. We have impact fees on new development. Grants, that's a big component of our capital program. Voted debt, we do have a current levy that will sunset at the end of 2023. We have a variety of partnerships and maintenance agreements. A good example of that is the agreement we have with WashDOT to maintain Aubrey Davis Park or portions of the park. Legislative appropriations, certainly sometimes the state legislature appropriates funds, as they just recently did for a trail safety project at Aubrey Davis. And certainly private donations, sponsorships, and perhaps a handful of other revenue resources are also available to us. I wanted to just take a brief tour through real estate excise tax, because it certainly is the driver of most of our funding. We collect real estate excise tax 0.5% on property transactions. There's two types of REIT. I'm not sure that it really matters a whole lot for this presentation, but REIT 1, 100% of REIT 1 goes to the Capital Improvement Fund. That is established, that practice is established by city policy. Under state law, REIT 1 can be used for street, parks, utilities, or facilities. So in the case of our city, we direct all of REIT 1 to our Capital Improvement Fund, which again, that is our fund that covers parks, open space, and buildings. REIT 2, by city policy, 90% goes to the street fund and 10% to the Capital Improvement Fund. And I've noted here that in the case of REIT 2, state law allows for REIT 2 to be used for streets, parks, utilities, not buildings, and also most recently for affordable housing. We cannot use real estate excise tax for vehicles, equipment, or technology. And under some circumstances, we can use REIT for maintenance, but I'm not going to get into that for this presentation. Okay. Oops, I've got some animation in there. So let's see if I can advance this slide. There we go. Real estate excise tax is performing well. And I just wanted to share that. This slide was actually prepared in November of 2021. And this is a clip from the 21-22 biennial budget, the city's biennial budget. And it shows our long-term REIT forecast. What actually happened in 2020, we projected to get about $3.7 million in real estate excise tax, but the actual came in at 4.35. And so we're seeing a trend, we're not quite sure how long it's going to hold, of real estate excise tax coming in higher than anticipated. When this slide was prepared in November, we were projecting to be 2021 real estate excise tax to be somewhere close to $5.5 million. It actually is probably going to come in higher than that, above 6 million and possibly close to 7 million. So I'm sharing this because real estate excise tax, we have a healthy amount of revenue. We're also projecting good returns in 2022 as well. And that's because we've had some really significant property sales on the island. Shorewood Apartments sold in 2021, and the former Farmers Building sold to Riot Games in 2021. So that along with home sales is driving higher than historical real estate excise tax returns. So REIT performance remains strong. Historically, about 2 million of the city's annual REIT revenues are dedicated to the Capital Improvement Fund, which again covers a handful of things: open space, trails, and buildings and parks. So right now we are projecting higher than historical in terms of REIT, which will help us fund our capital improvement program for parks. And as a reminder, we do have to keep our eyes on city facilities as well, because City Hall, the maintenance facility, are certainly aging and will likely require future investments. So one of the things that's curious about the PROS plan adoption is just the timing. We are actually ahead of the city's biennial budget process. So we're going to be adopting a CIP ahead of the budget process, but that's okay, because remember that the 2023-2024 budget will be informed by the first 2 years of the adopted CIP. But that also means we're working from basic and incomplete assumptions about the revenue forecast, and we know things can change. So just a reminder, the CIP was prepared ahead of the next long-term revenue projection. This is a very busy slide, and this is the revenue projections, the preliminary revenue projections that were put together to accompany the PROS plan CIP proposal. And what it shows here is that we are proposing about $41.7 million in parks capital improvement program expenditures from 2023 to 2028. And if you look down here, the estimated revenues are about 17 million, leaving us short about 24 million. So this is an unbalanced CIP, meaning that we're projecting more expenditures than we have revenue. There's a couple things I want to point out. Remember, this is a plan. So adopting a plan gives us plenty of runway. Well, I shouldn't say plenty of runway. It gives us runway to then begin working on how we fund all these projects. This assumption was based on known revenues. So if you take a look at this line right here, King County Parks Levy, these are revenues that we collect from the King County Parks Levy, which will end in 2025. If the levy is renewed, then we would anticipate revenues being available in these out years, but this spreadsheet doesn't account for that because we don't know the outcome of that yet. The same applies to our own levy. We have a parks levy that will end in 2023. We will likely pursue a renewal. The council has not given that direction yet, but it's on our work plan. And so if that levy is successfully renewed, then again, we would anticipate capital revenue being available throughout these years. The grants section I want to point out, you'll notice here in 2024, we have a really large number plugged in for grants. This is largely tied to the Luther Burbank Dock project, where we feel confident that that project will continue to compete for and be awarded grants. We have grants plugged in a number of other places. And again, we plug in grants when we have some certainty. I shouldn't say certainty. We feel confident, more than 50%, that the project will be competitive. Are there more grants available? Certainly, that might be the case. We do have some of our projects that derive funding from the Arts Fund, the Stormwater Fund, the Transportation Fund, and certainly the WashDOT Maintenance Agreement. So all of those revenue sources have been included here. I will say this was a conservative revenue projection. It will be evolving over time, certainly over the next 6 years as we collect more information. And in particular, based on real estate excise tax performance right now, if that trend continues, then I would say most certainly from 2024 and on, these are really conservative REIT projections. So that's a snapshot of the revenue. I think I've covered all of these notes already. Just the text is here in case somebody is reading this without the accompanying audio. All right, I said this already, it's important to say it again. The park's CIP is unbalanced, which just simply means that the projected expenditures exceed the projected revenues by about $24 million. We have included a number of really significant and very expensive infrastructure projects in the park CIP, particularly related to docks, shorelines, and athletic fields. I said this already, but it's important to say it again. The park CIP revenue estimates are very preliminary, and that we'll be refining them over time, especially the real estate excise tax revenue. We think those are fairly conservative at this point. It is very important for us to adopt this plan so that we can begin working on funding these projects, particularly the pursuit of grants, partnership funding, and any other revenue opportunities that might be out there. That type of work requires a long lead time. So my bottom line here as we dive into the projects is, balancing this park CIP, it requires identification of additional revenues to fund the projects over the 6-year period. But that's why we have a plan, so that we can get these on the list and begin working on them. It is likely that some of the projects will move around. They may change, they might be modified, they could be deferred, or in some cases, we might even decide to remove a project from the list if we're not able to fund it. So the focus of the rest of this presentation is on the park's CIP project list. And since this video is being recorded in advance of the council meeting, I will direct my comments to the city council. Previously, we asked this list of questions to our various boards and commissions. So are you satisfied with proposed list of projects? Is this the right mix of projects? Do you feel that the projects align with the needs of our community related to parks, open space, trails, and infrastructure? And do you feel that the projects align with the community input we received? All right, moving on now into the individual projects. So I have some notes on what you'll see on the next few slides. Each project is assigned a project number. That's not something that you need to worry about necessarily. It's how we track the project internally. We did prepare initial cost estimates using 2021 information, and then the costs have been escalated 3% annually. So they do include a 3% inflation factor. I want to emphasize at this stage, most of these cost estimates are planning level based on, general project assumptions. As we get further down the path with project planning, particularly into design, those cost estimates become much more refined. We did include preliminary staff and consulting costs for the projects. Those numbers could be adjusted down the road a little bit as well. You'll note many of the projects are multi-year, and that reflects the time needed to design, permit, and construct a project. And we'll try to point that out as we get further in here. Let's move my little screen there. So we did derive, these projects came off of what we call the 20-year Parks Capital Facility Plan. It's also called the 20-year list or the Parks Master List. That's a document where we list all of the projects, potential projects that we have in the park system. We also moved forward projects to the CIP. It was based on community feedback. We had a prioritization tool used to rank the projects that was based on a weighted criteria. Certainly staff played a role in deciding and recommending how the projects were prioritized. And then we took into account, I mentioned this earlier, sequencing, like what is it going to take to permit and design these projects. And this is really important, as you'll see in a moment, in the case of shoreline and dock projects, which typically require more than 3 years to complete. So this has come up in discussion quite a bit, and I wanted to at least take a moment here to talk about the CFP. So this is just a screenshot of a few projects off of the Capital Facilities Plan, which is also the 20-year project master list. It's what I was just talking about. So we developed a tool, the staff in partnership with the Parks and Recreation Commission to basically rate all of our potential projects. And it was weighted heavily towards infrastructure that is at the end of its useful life. This was just a tool, right? It wasn't the decision maker. It was just one tool we used to evaluate all of these projects. So in the example to the left, what I want to point out is this is the Hollerback Open Space project. This is the Luther Burbank Dock project. This is a Luther Trail project. And this is Wildwood Park. And so if you look to the right, you can see that Luther Burbank scored really high, meaning it's a high priority, largely because of infrastructure that's at the end of its useful life. Hollerback scored lower, and so did this trail and this Wildwood project. But all four of these projects ended up in the CIP, and that's because as the Parks and Recreation Commission was working through this list, we needed to prioritize the projects that had, end of life issues. We had infrastructure failure, but we also took into account public comment. So we knew that trails and open space were a really, really high priority for our community. And so all of that went into developing the 6-year list. So I hope that provides some context to the CFP and the rating tool, that it was just one component of the decision-making and building the recommendation. All right, so now we're actually, I promise you now, getting to the projects. So this is a map. It's included in chapter 11 of the PROS plan. It shows the location of all of the projects by number. And I'll have some different visual aids in just a moment to give you a sense of how they spread across the island. So let's start with athletic fields. We have a number of projects proposed here. And as we go through each category, and now my colleagues will probably join in and add some commentary. I have some high-level themes for each category, and then we'll talk about each project. So the high level theme, by the way, that's Ferroglia Fields at Aubrey Davis Park on a bright sunny day. Key themes, safety and maintenance. Most of our projects include multiple backstop replacements and extension of fences to address safety with fly balls. Numerous turf replacement projects because the synthetic turf is at the end of its useful life. We are looking at installation of new turf on the south fields at Island Crest Park, which would expand capacity. And we are proposing to combine a number of these athletic field projects into one, I'll call it a mega project in 2023 for efficiencies. All right, so this map shows you the location of the projects, just so you can see how they're spread throughout the island. This is Aubrey Davis Park, this is Island Crest Park, and this is the South Mercer Playfields. This look, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on what you're seeing here, but what I want to point out is for athletic field projects, we're proposing $5 million in expenditures over the 6-year CIP. And right now we're projecting just a little under $4 million in revenue. Most of that revenue comes from a pretty significant contribution of REIT funds, about 2.5 million we're recommending right now. And then we also will use the sinking fund to pay for the turf replacements. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So that's the financial picture for the athletic fields. Let's take a look at some of these projects. This is Aubrey Davis Park. As you can see, this is an older backstop. It doesn't have the safety nets or the extended fencing. So we're proposing this project to be completed in the 2027-28 timeline. It's estimated about $800,000, and it will be a full fence and backstop replacement. And this is really important safety project because there's the Mountains to Sound Greenway Trail runs right through this area. There is grant potential for this project, but we don't feel confident that we'll be super competitive because athletic field grants, there are a lot of applicants and not a lot of state or county money available for the projects. Moving on to Island Crest Park, we've got a couple projects here. So the first one is the south field at Island Crest Park. It's a lights replacement and a turf upgrade. So you can see these are some of our older light poles. We would propose fully replacing the poles and the lights as part of this project. These are old lights, and Paul can jump in here and say a little bit more about the existing lighting. So this is an energy efficiency project, and it also will reduce light spillover and glare. And then the South field at Island Crest Park is currently natural grass, and this project proposes a conversion to synthetic turf, which will help us address capacity. We can play more sports and year round on synthetic turf. We think this project is a strong potential for a grant because we're converting a natural grass field to synthetic turf. And those types of projects are more competitive than things like turf replacement. This may also be eligible for impact fees. Paul, is there anything else you've been hanging out in the background while I've been talking here that you'd like to say about these light poles, or did I cover it?
Well, the other benefit of this project is that the new lights are super efficient LED lights. They reduce spill into the neighborhood as well as reduce energy costs to about 1/3 of the current HID lights.
Excellent. That's great information. And the type of lights we'd install here will be similar to what we have on the North Field.
That's correct.
Thank you. So moving on, we're still at Island Crest Park, and now we're looking at the North Field. And I've plugged in this little symbol here to indicate that the project is urgent. So you'll see that symbol show up on a couple of other projects as we go through the slide deck here. We are proposing a north infield turf and backstop replacement project in 2023 on the North Field at Island Crest Park. That's about a $1 million project. We'll replace the synthetic turf in the infield to match the cork and shock pad on the rest of the field. The turf was installed in 2012, and typically synthetic turf has a life of anywhere from about 8 to 12 years, depending on a number of factors. And so this turf is due for replacement. You will also see here, there's a shot down the fence line here that this project includes a full backstop and fence replacement. It would extend the height and the fence line to address fly balls. So this is another safety, important safety project for us. This one we don't feel will be a strong contender for a grant application, but we would evaluate that for sure. We are proposing to combine this project and bring on a consultant to design this project at the same time we're working on the Southfield portions of the Southfield project. Sinking fund resources, remember that's the money we collect off of athletic field fee rentals. We will be able to use sinking fund resources for the turf replacement, but we don't have enough in the sinking fund to do this project and the turf replacement at South Mercer. So that's part of the reason we have a little bit of a deficit. Certainly we'll be working with the school district and others on how we fund all of these projects. Paul, is there anything else you wanted to say about this project? Oh, you're on mute. There we go.
Okay, thank you. You covered it, I think.
All right, thanks. Okay, this is the other part of the Island Crest Park Field project. This is the backstop replacement. Let me move my little video box here. Again, older backstop. We don't have continuous high fence lines down the foul ball lines. We anticipate a little over $300,000 for this project. We would combine this with the project I was just describing and do this work in 2023. Again, grant potential, but we're not sure how competitive we would be with this project. So it's something we would look at, but we don't feel that this project would be a strong contender. Okay, before I get into the South Mercer Playfield project, I want to acknowledge that our pros plan process is tracking at the same time as the Mercer Island School District is considering a field improvement project of their own. And just to reassure you, we are in touch, and we know that as they make funding decisions, our projects will need to be reconciled and aligned. So what they're looking at, the school district is looking at a capital improvement project at the South Mercer Playfields. It's actually a decision at the time of this recording on February 4th between South Mercer and the high school JV field. And so if they end up directing the funds to South Mercer, the project they've proposed is a complement to the one that we have, but we'd obviously have to work to bring it all together and then get our consultants on board and make it all happen. So I just put this slide in to say, hey, we're aware. And we still recommend the pros plan includes the projects that we have proposed, and then we would work to reconcile the two projects as we get a little bit further down the path. That being said, let me move my video box out of the way. At South Mercer, the project we have on deck, and this is an urgent project because the turf is at the end of its useful life, is a synthetic turf replacement and a backstop upgrade. So the synthetic turf at South Mercer that was installed on the infields was installed in 2010. So we're right there kind of at the end of its useful life. It's a $1.7 million project. We've also are planning to replace all the backstops and fences, again, taller, higher for safety enhancement. As I said before, these types of projects aren't highly competitive for grants, but we would certainly look at it. The turf replacement will draw from the sinking fund, but as I just noticed, we have turf replacement due at a couple different facilities, and it's unlikely that we have enough in sinking fund to cover the full costs of replacement. So we will need funding from other places, and certainly we'll be talking to the school district about how we partner on that. All right, I'm going to move on to beaches and shoreline, and you'll get to hear from some of my colleagues now. So the key themes for for beaches and shoreline projects is in our community engagement process, certainly being an island community with all of our wonderful amenities, the beaches, having access to the waterfront and water-oriented programs were a very high community priority. That being said, most of our dock and shoreline infrastructure is at the end of its useful life. In fact, we have structures that are close to 50 years old. A lot of these facilities need replacement, otherwise they will need to be removed. And what we will share about this is replacing them is much easier than building new docks and overwater structures in the facility in the future. As we make upgrades to these parks, most of these facilities were not built at the time the ADA was in place, so we will need to address ADA accessibility where possible and feasible. This is also where I will mention the dock and shoreline work is complicated, right? So it requires extensive design and permitting time, somewhere in the 3 to 5 year window. It's also very, very expensive. This is where a large portion of the expenditures in the proposed CIP come from. The other thing is that we're fortunate, Luther Burbank in particular, it functions like a regional facility. Thus far, we have been successful with obtaining grants, and we anticipate future projects like the Luther Burbank Dock project will continue to be very competitive. This is the map of where the projects are located. Not surprising, Luther Burbank, Groveland, and Clark Beach. Okay, this is the expenditure revenue snapshot. So what I'll point out is anticipated project expenditures for these capital projects is close to $12 million. And we've identified preliminarily close to $5 million in revenue. A good portion of the funding for these projects, at least in the revenue that we've identified already, comes from this kind of long list of grants here. Something that we'll just talk about, I'll talk about now, and we'll get into it a little bit later, is you'll see Groveland, the Groveland project here and the Clark Beach project here are to be determined. And that's because we have not yet completed the master plan for these facilities, but we know the infrastructure is in a condition that it's going to have to be replaced. And so we preliminarily estimated costs for those future improvements with an asterisk, right? It really depends on the outcome of the master planning process, excuse me. All right, so Paul, I've been working on Luther Burbank. Why don't you jump in here and talk about these slides, starting with the swim beach renovation project.
Sure. So the Luther Swim Beach is a 50-year-old facility. It was built exactly 50 years ago this year. It is been subject to shoreline erosion and just aging facilities. So the plan that needs more design is to make it an ADA accessible beach with new restrooms and other features. And the beach would expand slightly to the north, as well as provide a kayak launch at the very south end. We only have very preliminary conceptual design on this at this point. We have to go through full design process, including public input. This would be moderately competitive for grants. It is because of it being close to I-5 and other transit. It is a regional facility and has good scoring on those grant applications.
And so this, in terms of sequencing, this is proposed to be a 2024 to 2026 project. And so it would follow what we anticipate would be completion of the Luther Burbank Dock project, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And our planning level estimate for this is about 1.2 million. All right, that's a good segue, Paul. And this project is underway. So my video box is in the way again. The Luther Burbank Park Dock project. Tell us about where that is and a little bit more about the project.
Sure. So the dock project is just finishing up 30% design. It started out just as the dock project, but as we got into the design of the docks, realized that the adjacent waterfront needed to be renovated also. So the components are to renovate the North Pier as a pier for existing uses such as sunbathing and fishing, but also to allow large power boats, that's boats larger than 26 feet, to moor there. The south piers would be removed and replaced with floating piers, floating docks that would accommodate small power boats less than 26 feet and non-motorized watercraft such as kayaks and paddle boards and sailboats. The outer dock would function also to attenuate the wave action from the East Channel to make the non-motorized dock more functional. In other words, you don't want to get into a kayak while there's boat wakes coming in. The expanded scope also includes improving shoreline access to the north of the boiler building, where we have a beach that mostly disappears in the summer with high water. The beach would be expanded and allow for the use during the summer high water season. Next to the boiler building is a restroom facility that would be renovated, and on top of that restroom, a viewpoint and outdoor classroom facility would be built with ADA access. And that would provide us a place for boating programs to have classes and other types of outdoor education. And finally, the plaza would receive a number of different improvements, including an overwater stair that extends along the Handsome Bollard bulkhead, which would allow people to get down to the water level without having to go down to the beach. And it provides a different experience than other waterfront facilities offer. The plaza would also have a new tree planted in place of the 3 existing trees that are stunted and growing poorly, and have other amenities such as benches and picnic tables. This is a very strong contender for grant funding because of the regional facility nature, and we are already operating with grant funding on some of the design components, such as the small boat dock and the storm drainage features.
So all in, we're estimating project costs around 3.8 million. We do anticipate there could be, some modest swings, if any modest swings, just based on, materials and our construction window here. But it's important to note that we've received funding for the design, and because of that, we do feel the facility is a strong contender for construction funding as well. And we are in process with all of those grants. So this is probably one of the most significant parks capital projects we have done as a city in decades. And it will have a really incredible impact on, one of our flagship parks. So we're really excited to be underway. Since I'm recording this for the council meeting, council, I will say we will be asking you to appropriate capital money to make sure we can fully fund this project in the next biennium. Groveland Beach and the next slide, which I think is on Clark, I'll go ahead and take these. I mentioned earlier that both Groveland and Clark are also have capital structures, overwater structures and shorelines that are close to the end of their useful life, pushing on 50 years old. This is later in the presentation, but we're going to be asking for funding to do a joint master plan for Groveland and Clark so that we can plan for the shoreline improvements. In the meantime, we put in a very generous placeholder into the park CIP, a little over $4 million for dock replacement and shoreline improvements at Groveland. And you might be remembering that we did a dock project at Groveland not too long ago. That was basically a major maintenance project in 2019, which stabilized the dock and extended the life by about 10 years. So it didn't address the long-term problems, but we bought ourselves some time. And we are at a place where full dock replacement is needed. We also anticipate a future project will include replacing the bulkhead with a larger bulkhead, possibly creating a zero depth entry beach. And if you go out to Groveland and you stand on the bulkhead and look over, you can see that the existing bulkhead is undermined. This is probably not a strong contender for grants because Groveland really functions more like a local beach. But there might be something that comes up that we would take a look at. And Clark Beach, as I just mentioned as well, it's also, we put in a placeholder. We're also proposing this to be part of a joint master plan. Similar issues, the existing bulkhead and docks are at the end of their useful life. We would propose replacing some of the hardened shoreline. You can see it in these images here, just a lot of concrete with a more natural shoreline and pocket beaches. We do think this is a contender for some types of grants because the types of improvements that we could make at this park would really improve the environmental circumstances. And I'd like to have, Paul or Elaine talk about what those opportunities look like.
So this Clark Beach is just across the water from the mouth of the Cedar River, which is where salmon runs come and go. And so shoreline, any kind of shoreline aquatic habitat improvement here has high impact on those salmon runs, spawning gravels, shoreline vegetation, large woody debris, all those components add value to the shoreline habitat. And the more of that we can work into the renovation project here, the better. And makes it more competitive for salmon recovery funding as well as recreation grants.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul. I should have mentioned, if you're familiar with Groveland Beach Park, the grades are such that ADA access to the shoreline is highly unlikely to be achievable, or feasible. We left a note here just to say that we need to take a closer look at Clark Beach. The grades are friendlier, but that would be, part of our planning process. And certainly we have the draft ADA transition plan to guide, the planning work at this facility as well. Okay, open space and trail projects, moving on to a different category of park CIP projects. Key themes here. First of all, we combine open space and trails because there's a lot of overlap. But in the community engagement process for the PROS plan, trails and trail connections were the highest priority. And walking was the top recreational activity. That's not surprising. Nationally, that is consistent with trends. As we talked with the community, really, they emphasize preservation, maintenance, and restoration of open spaces also as a very high priority. Your capital improvement plan includes resources annually for basically our ongoing investment in capital projects. And I may have Elaine jump in here to say a little bit more about what these are, but we set aside, we're recommending $300,000 plus a 3% increase annually for open space management, $50,000 a year plus the inflation factor for trail renovation and property management, and then $180,000 annually plus the inflation factor for Pioneer and Engstrom. Elaine, did you want to say anything about how those resources are used?
Sure, I'd be happy to speak to that. So I think the open space management and the Pioneer / Engstrom open space forest management budgets that are pulled out here are for really similar scopes of work. A lot of this actually is going towards contracted restoration work within all of the open spaces across the island. A lot of that is invasive species removal and really trying to retain the canopy that we have existing in those open spaces, and then replanting those forests with native species, both trees and shrubs. The trail renovation and property management is a little bit of a different project. So the trail renovation portion of this is anticipated to be a great deal of that budget allocation. So the trail renovations are just slightly above maintenance. So this is where we're seeing some degradation of structures in our trails, and really just making sure that those trails are being kept up adequately, and that our drainage is good on those trails. So this is really, we try and tick off a number of projects each year just to keep our trails in great shape. Property management, I will let Paul address, because I think he probably can speak to that pretty well, how that budget is used.
The property management covers a variety of services that we need to provide on call during the course of the biennium. It would be evaluating proposed open space for purchases or donations. It would be evaluating boundary lines for possible encroachments or the need for easements, trail easements that we might want to try to acquire in the future, as well as just general property research. We are continuing to want to understand what the restrictions and covenants are on properties that have been purchased or donated to the city.
Thank you both. A quick look at the map, and then Paul and Elaine will have a little more to share. So these are similar to the previous maps. These are the locations of the various open space and trail projects. So spread out pretty well from north to south. I will mention that these are all Aubrey Davis Park projects, which is why you see in Upper Luther the dots so close. So let's talk about what those specific projects are. Actually, before we get there, sorry about that. The expenditure revenue snapshot. So we have about $7 million in proposed capital projects over the 6-year period for the CIP, and about $4 million in projected revenue. So we're short about 3 million. Some of these projects, potential grant contenders, I think there's mostly smaller projects, so we'd really have to evaluate each one as they come up. But that's the reason we do a plan, so that we have an opportunity to do that evaluation work. All right, now let's talk about these projects. I think Paul is up, perhaps.
Yep. So Aubrey Davis Lid Connector Trail. This is where 84th Avenue and North Mercer Way transition just at the very south end of Luther Burbank Park. There's a hill that goes up to the Luther Lid, and there has never been a trail connection that works there, but people have shortcut that connection for a long time, and you can see in this picture. So this would construct a concrete staircase up the hill with sidewalk connections and a ADA sidewalk connection as well to the Mountains to Sound Trail to provide ADA access that's similar to the concrete stairs. This has been pre-approved by WashDOT, and it has been identified in both the Luther Burbank Park and Aubrey Davis Park master plans. Project is expected to come in around $1 million. There may be some potential for grant or transportation costs to be shared.
Thank you. All right.
Moving on to Aubrey Davis Trail in general. The Mountains to Sound Trail that runs through Aubrey Davis Park is 30 years old, and it has root heaves and cracks and pavement that is failing. We need to address this. It is not in the maintenance agreements with WashDOT. It's not very clear if WashDOT has any responsibility for this, but regardless, it needs to be addressed because we are experiencing this on an increasing basis as the trail ages. So it's not all sections of the trail, but there are specific sections that are in serious need of renovation. So it would mostly be patching, cutting out sections of asphalt and laying down new asphalt and providing root barrier where appropriate.
And Paul, the trail is at an age and a condition where I know you and I have talked, we anticipate that this type of kind of pavement and repair work will likely be an ongoing or recurring project, and we'll continue to work on the most problematic sections of the trail first. Is that a correct assumption?
That's the correct assumption. And I want to emphasize here that we are simply patching an existing trail. So we're not widening the trail or changing the dimensions of the trail. We're simply keeping the trail as it is with our work.
Thank you.
Next is the Mounts to Sound Spur Trail at Shorewood. There's a place where the trail follows North Mercer Way for a period of time, and then it cuts up the hill to Shorewood. And a lot of bikers like to get off at that point and ride on the North Mercer Way segment to avoid the hill that goes up to Shorewood. Right now, those bikers go down this narrow sidewalk, which is where kids going to the bus stop also travel, and there's a conflict there. There's a very easy grade that could be achieved just to the west of the sidewalk where bikes could cut off from the trail and get into the street and totally avoid their conflict with the sidewalk. It's not a very large budget project. It's $82,000, and there may be efficiencies there as well. We just don't know. There's other utility and street projects that may enable us to do this at a more efficient way. Trail lighting along the Island Crest Way to Shorewood segment of the Mountains to Sound Trail has been a safety issue for a long time. There's a very, very high retaining wall here. The retaining wall is about 20 to 30 feet high, and it blocks light from the south year-round. In the summer, that's not a big issue because the sun is high overhead and light gets to the backside of this retaining wall regardless. But in the wintertime, with the low sun angles, this is extremely dark, and it's dark for much of the day as well as the evening and nighttime. This would be a lighting project to provide a reasonable amount of lighting along this section of trail so that pedestrians and bicyclists can see where they're going and see the condition of the pavement as they ride so that they can make judgments about the safety and speeds that they need to use. This is a potential cost sharing project with WashDOT because it's a transportation project. So there's a possible partnership.
This might be a good time to mention as well that where we've noted potential cost sharing with WashDOT, we have an existing maintenance agreement with WashDOT that didn't fully contemplate the capital reinvestment needs of these facilities that we steward in partnership with WashDOT. And it is in our work plan to renegotiate that agreement. And so that's why we've included the reference that we anticipate collaboration on these capital projects, particularly on the transportation facilities. And that work, those conversations are still to come.
Lane is going to take this.
I will. Yeah, so this project is the Hollerbach Southeast 45th Trail System. So this references a new trail system that is proposed for Hollerbach Open Space, which is an open space located mid-island that currently has not a single trail to it, and in fact is very difficult to access. So what this trail proposal would be to create a system through this just beautiful ravine that would actually create a very highly needed east-west pedestrian connection between the ridge down the middle of Mercer Island and all the way down to East Mercer Way. And this is a project that will be pretty technical because of the topography of the site and would probably require a boardwalk and a bridge and a number of stairs. This would be a really important trail system, not just for providing access and providing this pedestrian connection, but also because this would really assist with being able to get into this ravine and do some overdue restoration work and some volunteer stewardship work. And right now, this is proposed for 2024, 2025, and the expected cost is somewhere about $500,000 to create this trail.
So in some of these slides, I should have covered this sooner. I've noted where we think we'll have an eligible use of impact fees, and keep in mind, impact fees are, the premise is growth pays for growth. So we collect impact fees on new development, and then those fees are used to enhance or expand the park system. So with a project like this, where we're taking basically an open space area that's not accessible, and we're making it accessible and adding public amenities, those improvements are impact fee eligible. There was a project that preceded this one, it was the field project at the South Field project at South Athletic Field project at Island Crest Park that was also impact fee eligible.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting with this one, the Hollerbach, that it will require a fair amount of design, which is why you see it spanning over 2 years. So because it will be a technical trail system, it will require a little more time. And then the second trail project here is the Upper Luther Ravine Trail, which is phase 2 of the Upper Luther Burbank Park Trail System. So a number of years ago, a trail was constructed from the west side of Upper Luther Burbank Park that goes all the way down into the ravine and terminates currently at the stream at the bottom of the ravine. So this trail would actually be a connection that goes up the east side of Upper Luther Burbank Park that would bring that trail connection all the way up into the Shorewood development. And by creating this trail connection, it would actually provide a continuous trail that goes all the way from Shorewood all the way down to town center. So there is definitely a desire to have this trail right now and provide that connection. It really is a missing link within the trail system. Again, this is a technical trail project and would require some design. And so this again is spread over 2 years, 1 year for design and 1 for construction. The estimated cost is about $374,000. And like Jesse was saying, again, this is eligible for impact fees because it does expand our trail system within the parks, and something that obviously was a very high need and desire from folks who answered those community surveys. And then we come to Mercerdale Hillside. So Mercerdale Hillside has a pretty extensive trail system in it right now. When this trail system was created, there were a lot of timber structures that were constructed as part of that, a lot of stairs throughout the park, and then obviously the very large stairway that runs along the north edge of the Mercerdale Hillside property. All of these structures are aging at about the same rate, and we're starting to see some significant decay within those timber crib stairs. There are some of these stairways that were built, such as the picture that you see here in the upper left, where it's not really clear that stairs are really necessary for some of these grades. And so this project is really addressing the various issues that we're seeing across the park in that trail system right now. Some of that will be removing some of these stairways, and some of it will be designing and rebuilding those large stairways that are really necessary. So we will be looking at what sorts of building materials could be used that we wouldn't have this ongoing issue of decay with, as we've seen across the park system. So really starting to do some research on how we can restructure these trails for the long term. And this, I will just note, is it looks like it's proposed for 27 to 28. Again, There's design and there's construction associated with this, and it is currently estimated at about $750,000 for all of this work.
Thank you, Elaine. All right, Wildwood.
Wildwood. So one more trails project. So this project is really about a little bit of a comprehensive look at park improvements within Wildwood Park. There is a loose trail system within Wildwood Park, and this project would really look at making that trail system more cohesive. So really looking at the connections between the east and the west sides of the park, and really looking at how an ADA trail around the perimeter could be constructed within this park. It would also improve visibility to this park from the Island Crest Way side, including an installation of a park sign. Again, this would be impact fee eligible, as it would create more trails within the parks and meet the needs for more walkability and more trail connections. This is proposed for 2026 to 27, same deal. So it's got a design component and a construction component, and the estimation right now is at about $238,000.
Thank you, Elaine. The park projects, you'll see they're a little north end heavy. That's because that's where most of our active parks are on the island. We do have a landing project proposed on the very south tip there that we'll talk about in just a moment. Here is the summary. We have so many active parks projects, it takes 2 slides to show them to you. So the proposed capital investment is about 8.5 million. And the preliminary revenue estimate for these projects is 2.1 million. So we have a deficit of about 6.4 million. All right, Paul, do you want to take this one?
Yep. We are lucky to have lake water development rights currently that if we want to keep them, we have to develop them fully before somebody else claims them. This would provide irrigation to 3 parks, Luther Burbank, Groveland, and Clark Beach, which are our main waterfront parks. And the reason that the lake water irrigation would be easy there is because it's hard to transport or pump water a long distance, but if we're pumping it just to the shoreline turf areas adjacent to the lake, it's a pretty efficient delivery of water. Another justification for this project is that water costs are expected to inflate faster than CPI over the next several decades. And so this, even though is an investment now, it is expected to pay off over the long term. We need to be able to start drawing water in order to claim the right. And so this is scheduled fairly early in the CIP. It's 24, 25, and it's about 2.25 for that. Aubrey Davis Park has 2 playgrounds. One is Lid B, and that's the one that's along West Mercer Way. You probably know that playgrounds deteriorate over time. The UV degradation and then wear and tear and fatigue on the metal creates the need to replace the playgrounds every 15 or 20 years. That's the typical recommended replacement cycle. And Aubrey Davis Lidby is coming up on that 15 to 20 year window. This is a bigger playground for Aubrey Davis Park. And this would be a replacement of the existing playground with ADA access and new surfacing that would provide full ADA access to the equipment. It would also provide ADA parking along West Mercer Way for 1 or 2 parking stalls, and that would reconfigure the curbing along West Mercer Way. This would be recommended to be completed with other playground renovation so that we gain efficiencies that way.
And I wanted to mention with all the playground replacements that, what we would hope to achieve as we kind of work through the island and we're replacing playground equipment is just to diversify our playgrounds so that we don't have the same pieces at multiple parks. And we would anticipate, working with, the neighborhoods and doing a little process similar to what we did for Mercerdale as we work through these playground replacements. So this project is intended to pair with this next one here, which is the restroom project at the lid. And I'll let Paul share more of the details, but I will say in the community engagement process, restrooms were in the top 4 of high priorities for folks visiting our parks. So Paul, share a little bit about this project.
Sure. So we have one restroom in Aubrey Davis Park. It's over by 72nd, and it serves the ball fields over there. This is more than a quarter of a mile away. And West Mercer Way is the other focal point of Aubrey Davis Park, where we have soccer and lacrosse activities, as well as a playground and basketball courts. So the need for a playground, for a restroom here is fairly evident, and it was part of the Aubrey Davis Park master plan to install a new restroom here. The restroom would be on the east side of West Mercer Way near the playground, and it would tie into existing utilities, which would be a little bit of a challenge because we're on a lid over the freeway, but it can be done. And that would be make it a full restroom, very similar in size, perhaps, to the one that's over by lid A. Because it's an expanding capacity, it is impact fee eligible, and it has some other grant potential as well. It's a high project cost because of the location and because we have to work with WashDOT whenever we're close to the lid structure that's over the freeway. They're very protective of that, understandably, and so there's extra engineering that goes into building anything near there. This project would also include a pathway to that restroom, and that would also extend to the basketball courts, which are at the far end of that lid B field.
And Paul, if you already said this and I missed it, I apologize. This project, this new restroom, was identified in the Aubrey Davis master plan. All right.
Okay, and then in the town center, we have the Greta Hackett Outdoor Sculpture Gallery, which is right next to the new light rail station. We have put a capital project in for the gallery because it does need renovation. But the other purpose of this project is to be able to respond to needs for the gallery park area as we see the new uses of this area with the opening of light rail. So we haven't really developed a scope of work for this yet because it will be dependent on what we observe from the first year of light rail operation. It's entirely possible that we could use this funding to match cultural arts grants, and so and leverage more work in this area. But the art pieces that are there have been there for quite a while, and we may want to rotate them out and provide new artwork or other placemaking opportunities that we develop.
Great. So we anticipate this project would be, a collaboration with the Arts Council. And I do want to emphasize, we feel pretty strongly that, as we scope the project and engage with the community, that there is potential for grant funding for this future project.
There are 4 tennis courts, or 3 tennis courts at on the Lid Park that have been there since the park opened in the early 90s. They have not been resurfaced in quite a long time. They are cracked and the fortunate thing about them is that there are no places where the cracks are uneven or displaced. So we believe that the cracks can be sealed and a new surfacing applied, and that would provide the renovation for these courts to last another 10 to 15 years at least. The other piece of this renovation is the idea that these courts could be restriped for pickleball as well as tennis. We currently have that configuration at Luther Burbank Park, and it's working quite well. We might want to explore that here as well.
So this is would be a project that would be proposed for the next biennium, and it's we're estimating about $120,000 for that project. More on courts. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, so Luther Burbank Park has is not as in good shape as Aubrey Davis Park. The cracking is extensive and displaced, and we basically need to tear up the pavement and put down new asphalt in order for this to continue to be a court recreational facility. While we're doing that, it may make sense to convert some or all of these courts to pickleball. That is dedicated pickleball. In other words, the nets would be reset in addition to a new striping system. So that's would be explored in the process of designing this project, but and there would be some additional work to upgrade the drainage, and there's some ADA and building code issues that need to be addressed while we're doing this renovation as well. So it's a fairly significant renovation, but it's a 50-year-old facility, so it's the timing is right. And that would be $500,000 in 23 and 24.
All right. Also, and I think we have a couple of projects here at Luther that the timing aligns, so they may or may not make sense to bid together, but I just wanted to call out. So this is another one proposed for 2023.
Yeah, so this one would deal with a portion of the parking lot at Luther Burbank Park, so one of the most heavily used parks on the island. And this is in the southeast corner of the parking lot. There currently is no lighting, and so this would actually provide lighting in that area, which is also the area that has all of the ADA parking stalls currently. And by lighting this area, we would create a contiguous lighted pathway all the way to the Luther Burbank Park Administration building and playground area. So this is a safety enhancement. The good news is that some of the conduit that would be needed for installing this lights is already in place, which will reduce costs for installation. And this is proposed for the first year of the biennium and is estimated at $133,000.
Thank you. We have another playground project here.
Yeah, so the theme of most of these playground projects is going to be things that I've already described, which is that playgrounds last for 15 to 20 years. The equipment degrades from sunlight and from fatigue, and Roanoke is no exception. The equipment would be replaced, and Roanoke provides an opportunity for ADA access that is probably better than some of our other parks. So the ADA access would be a feature here. This is recommended to be combined with other park improvements at Roanoke that would provide renovation to the general landscape and ADA access to the tennis courts there. So this is the general park and ADA improvement project. It would install signs and a new bike rack, install new benches, and a stair leading to the tennis court. It would address landscaping on the east side of the tennis court and resurface the tennis court and possibly stripe it for pickleball. So ADA is a key theme through both of these projects.
Thank you.
Dean's Children's Park is in need of timely renovation as well. The castle, the swings, and the climbing rock would be replaced in 2024 or 2025. Dean's Children's Park is also a good candidate for ADA access because of the grades around the park. They're fairly level. Dean's Children's Park provides some greater diversity of play experiences. So we will want to make sure that those diversity elements are preserved in whatever we replace here. And the cost is $281,000 in 2024 and 25.
And Paul, when we presented on this playground previously, I know there was some confusion, and we kind of systematically worked through. This is a very large playground. So this project is just the castle swings and the climbing rock replacement. And the other components of that playground are kind of in a sequence of phased replacements. All right, First Hill Park, another playground.
Yeah. So this one includes a basketball court that needs to be resurfaced. This is a fairly small playground. It has a slide that is kind of unique. Again, so we have an opportunity here to preserve some unique play opportunities. And this one is also a fairly level site, so it has good ADA possibilities. And this park probably needs some neighborhood involvement in the planning phase so that we can make sure we're meeting the needs of the surrounding neighborhood. It's a very local park, but it's well loved by the neighbors. Total cost is $416,000 in 2026 and 2027.
And this one, I'll let Paul and Elaine jump in. I did field some questions in advance because what we put in here was the funding for the design of the amphitheater only, not the construction. And there were a couple reasons for doing that. We need to spend some time with the community and certainly with an architect, kind of thinking about what the space can become. But we fully anticipate this project will be competitive for grants. And so, in fact, we have a potential community partner that might be interested in working with us on this project. And so what we wanted to do was make sure we do the engagement process and we get the design complete. And then that really sets us up to go out and talk with potential partners and fundraise for the capital. So that is why this was programmed in this manner. Paul or Elaine, can you talk a little bit about what's at this facility, the age? I mean, the pictures obviously tell the story, but just a few words on the condition.
I'll let Elaine handle this one.
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of the age problems that we're seeing at this facility, again, much like the timber crib steps that I was talking about on trails, have to do with the fact that the wood is simply breaking down at this site, and just the sort of wear and tear that you would see over that amount of time. So I think it's really going to be looking at the retaining structures that currently provide the terraced seating area for the stage, and then also looking at, you know, the design of the back and finding out really if it's serving the needs that that we want met at this site. So we're just seeing sort of average deterioration, and we want to get ahead of it and really think about how we want to repair this instead of just providing Band-Aids at this site.
Thank you.
So the Mercer Island Community and Events Center is connected to Luther Burbank Park by 2 staircases. One is concrete, the other one is timber crib steps. And both of these structures are in need of repair and replacement. This project would replace both of them and and design them to be longer lasting. Neither of these facilities have lasted particularly long, and I think that maybe has to do with the site, but also with the construction technique. So we look for something that's a little more robust in the new facility that is appropriate for the amount of traffic that this route gets. And the cost is $233,000, and it would be in 27 and 28.
And it's, I think
one
similar to
thing
some of
that's-
the other, or maybe you were going to say that, Elaine, some of these steps are kind of having the same kind of failure problems we're having throughout the system. But you can also see in this image, if you go walk the steps, where the concrete portion of this connection is also starting to fail. I'm sorry, Elaine, did you want to say anything else?
Oh, no, I just wanted to say that this is a sort of a heavily used route, right? Connecting these two really important facilities. And I think one component of this that's going to be really important are the connections on either end. So the crosswalk across the access road down to Luther Burbank Park, really looking at visibility at that crosswalk and making sure that that's as safe as it can be designed. And then also looking at the connection at the lower end where it comes into the Luther Burbank parking lot, and really making sure that there's a dedicated access and connection into the park that is that's thoughtful and safe. So I think, besides just the actual trail, I think really looking at either end and how we serve those interfaces with traffic.
That's a really great point. Thank you. Secret Park.
Secret Park, same theme with the other playgrounds. This one is needing to be replaced in roughly 2026 and 27. It has a little more difficulty to provide ADA access because it's on a slope, but we are required to do at least the minimum standard there. And it's a small playground, so it's a fairly low budget given the amount of work that we'll probably need to put in just to meet minimum ADA requirements. So it's $535,000, and that would occur in 2026 and 27.
And finally, I want to just kind of zoom out and mention all the landings, and then, Paul or Elaine could maybe help me out with some details. We have a number of street ends throughout the island. Sometimes we call them landings, sometimes street ends. They are small, kind of like a pocket park, but they provide really important waterfront access throughout the island. And as we know, waterfront access was one of the top priorities in our community engagement process. And the street ends all need a little bit of love. And so what we're recommending is, over time, maybe every 3 to 5 years, another landing gets an investment and a makeover, if you will. We picked the South Point landing mostly to balance investments. In the parks category, we have a lot in the north end. And so we decided to recommend working south to north. But that could certainly change. We had some feedback that maybe South Point may not be the first investment. It's out in 2024. It's $158,000. So we may want to look at that. But Paul, there's or Elaine, there's some common themes across all of these landings. They need kind of new benches, some landscaping. You want to just kind of hit the highlights of kind of all of these projects?
Yeah, I think some high level points on street ends. One is that a lot of these street end parks are actually shared with our utility infrastructure. And so there's a number of different factors we need to take into consideration when we're looking at improvements to these properties, right? Making sure that we're maintaining access for our maintenance crews and that those facilities can be kept up. But I also think that, these are all unique opportunities to access the lake, especially for the very local neighborhoods around them. And so really looking at the water access, so how people can actually get down to the lake. Some of these have steepened edges on them where we're seeing active erosion. And then I think also in terms of shoreline, anytime we're looking at these shorelines, we're really looking at what sort of stewardship we're doing to the lake and in terms of salmon habitat, even if they're very short sections of shoreline. So we look at things like native plantings that can overhang the lake, and really, really designing them smartly, that people can come and just passively recreate at these sites. People just seem to want to go down them to look at the lake and maybe not even necessarily get in. And I think a lot of these could do with some good improvements.
Thank you. Recreation facilities. As I mentioned way back when we started the presentation, the city's CIP fund covers both parks. I shouldn't say both. It covers parks, open space, trails, and buildings. And certainly within that category is the Mercer Island Community and Event Center. So our focus here on the community center is really on maintenance and upgrades, staying on top of protecting our investment in this facility and, addressing issues as they come up, making sure we're replacing things on cycle. We do set aside, just like in our park system, we set aside a small amount of money each year for building repairs. So in this case, the CIP includes $100,000 for building work and maintenance projects. We also have a technology and equipment fund that when the community center is fully operational and hosting events and things like that, we rely on robust technology and equipment to support our rental groups and our programs. And so we put about $40,000 annually into technology and equipment upgrades. Obviously, these projects are all proposed in the north end of the island. I should mention they also include the Luther Burbank boiler building, so the two recreation facilities in the north end of the island. So this is a snapshot at expenditures and revenues for recreation facilities. We're anticipating just under $6 million in expenditures, and $1.4 million in revenue. So this is where we have a pretty significant gap, and most of that has to do with the boiler building project that we'll talk about in just a minute. As I just mentioned a moment ago, most of our projects really entail kind of major maintenance. So this is a 2023 project, and we're at a point where we can't push this one off anymore. You can see the alligator cracking in the pavement. This is asphalt replacement. I should have said that a moment ago, at the entryway, and it's just wear and tear and age. So it's about $160,000 project. We also hoping to address some surface water drainage improvements as part of this project. And what we would anticipate is that we would bid this as part of our broader road improvement projects and overlay projects that we typically do in the summer. So it'd be combined with the public works project for efficiency and hopefully to get the best price on asphalt, if you will. I don't know that there's anything to add on that one. So let me go to this one, and I might ask for some help here. This is the parking lot. This is the community center again, the parking lot planter bed renovation project. We've got this one proposed for 2027. And again, maybe I'll look to Elaine or Paul. We have landscaping that is not thriving and performing relatively poorly. So we'd like to kind of dig all this out and replant.
I'm happy to jump in on this one, although
Thank you.
we both worked on this. So yes, the soils in these beds are not good soils by any stretch, but I think probably equally important is that they're not particularly deep. We see that roots are showing up at the surface at a lot of these planter beds, and the plants just simply aren't thriving. I know that Paul did a pilot project several years ago in one of these beds to try and really tackle these soil issues, and had really good success in improving the health of trees and the shrubs in these areas. So I think it was a good argument for just really looking at improving the soil health so that we can have thriving vegetation through this entire parking lot.
Thank you. This is the emergency generator project at the community center. Especially, I think, given our experience the past couple of years and having a higher demand for, shelters, even if it's just like last summer was a good example. We opened the community center as a cooling shelter. We have a generator currently that we use in emergencies. It only runs essential circuits. So the proposal is to expand our generator capacity at the community center so that we can power more of the building essentially, and really improve our service during emergencies, or hopefully not a major disaster. As a reminder, the community center is our shelter facility here on the island. We fully anticipate that we would be eligible for emergency management grants. It's part of the reason we wanted to get this into the plan now, so that we could begin researching and applying for those future resources. Okay, and Paul, I'm going to have you take this one. This is the boiler building, the full renovation project.
So in 2016 and 17, we did a facilities feasibility study for the boiler building. The Luther Burbank Park master plan calls for it to be a small craft boating center. And so the feasibility study looked at what it would take to make that master plan vision a reality. It involves stabilizing the building as phase one, which means making sure that smokestack and the masonry on the building don't fall off when we have an earthquake. It also involves a new roof. And then phase two would be the build out of the interior of the building for the small craft center. So it would provide an office, a classroom, and more structured boat storage in the bottom with a wheelchair lift so that the building is fully accessible. And the other part of phase two is a ADA route from the main campus by the administration building all the way down to the backside of the boiler building. So that whole package, phase one and two together, is about $4 million, and it's not a cheap thing. We're not sure what efficiencies or possibilities there are for grants, but we're exploring those. The thing that this really does is it expands the ability to have boating programs at the waterfront. So right now we have summer camps there, but we've had a lot of demand for the possibility of rentals and classes and things for not just school-age children, but for adults and other participants.
So I will mention, as we were working through the CIP recommendation with the Parks and Recreation Commission, I was asked occasionally, about the projects and what was aspirational. This project is an aspirational project. And, as staff, we were on the fence about whether or not it belonged in this 6-year CIP, or maybe it belonged in an out year. But we ultimately put it in, and the decision came about because in the community engagement process, as Paul was just saying, waterfront access and waterfront programming was really a high priority, if not the highest priority, for recreational activities. And we don't have a way to deliver the boating programs real easily. And we happen to have a building that is called out to be a future boathouse and to house these programs. And so we decided to put it in, and as we talked with the commission about it, this is one of those projects where we may have an opportunity to work with partners, the state, possibly even some historic preservation grants to help fund this, but it's going to take a long lead time, right? So we wanted to start working on it now so that we could plan for the project in the out years of the CIP. All right, and we're almost done here. So let me bring it home with a couple more categories. We do have a couple of park planning projects that are proposed to be funded in the CIP. And I'll just, the dots are there, but let me just dive into them here real quickly. Basically 3 planning projects totaling $700,000, and they are all stacked up right now to happen in 2023, which is a pretty aggressive schedule, but there's a reason that we are escalating them to 2023. And we're proposing to fully fund them with existing resources. So the first one is the Mercerdale Park Master Plan, and we estimate about $200,000 for this master plan. The reason that we're putting this up front right now is there is an anticipated sewer line replacement project that will run right through the middle of this park. In fact, if you stand out in the grassy area of Mercerdale Park, you can kind of see where the depression is. That's where the sewer line is. It runs north to south. So the sewer replacement project is a priority project, and we've actually been in front of council talking about that sewer line upgrade. And so it makes sense as we contemplate the future needs of Mercerdale Park to do the master planning process ahead of that sewer project. That way, when we do the sewer project construction, we can also contemplate making additional improvements to the park at that time. So that is proposed for 2023. We talked about this one earlier. This is the joint master plan for Clark Beach and Groveland Beach parks. So we would master plan both facilities kind of under one process, one umbrella. We're recommending $300,000 for that planning process. The reason we combine them is that these types of plans are just highly technical. And since we need to master plan both facilities, we felt that it would make sense to do them as a joint planning process. One of the things that we are going to recommend is upon adoption of the PROS plan that we allocate the funding now for these master plans and actually get started in 2022. Again, these projects have a long runway, and we want to sequence our planning projects so that we're not doing 2 master plans right at the same time. So we think it makes sense to start this one now in 2022. And then Mercerdale Park master plan to follow in 2023. There will be some overlap, but we will work that out. And finally, Paul and Elaine might have a few more comments on this. This is the annex facilities plan. Many of you are aware we have a building right behind the community center. We refer to it as the annex building. And the facility is quite old. It has a number of significant issues. And when the community center was rebuilt, the idea was that this building would probably only be around until 2009. So here we are in 2022, and we're doing what we can to hold it together. We have tenants that provide important community services in these buildings, in this building, excuse me. But the facility, we need to decide what we're going to do here. So the planning process to what we anticipate, would be to replace this structure, or it would be like a major renovation. We are requesting $200,000, and certainly how the replacement or renovation comes together, it's got to integrate with the community center. We also recommend, upon adoption of the PROS plan, accelerating this work to 2022. Obviously, there'd be a community engagement process, but much of what needs to happen here is getting an architect and consultant on board to start doing the visioning work early. Paul and Elaine, did I cover that one sufficiently? Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think you got it all, Jesse.
All right, I think we're good. Park property acquisition. This is new to the CIP. We're recommending establishing a reserve account to fund future park property acquisitions, which could include, properties for trail, open space, active parks. The funding is proposed to begin in 2025, and the recommendation is to set aside about $500,000 annually. I know the history of Mercer Island capital funding there has been a desire to fund this acquisition reserve for a long time, but it's challenging because we have so many significant infrastructure needs across the park system. And talking with the community, talking with the Parks and Recreation Commission and our other boards and commissions, we really feel strongly that we need to start setting aside funds now. Should a property become available or an easement or something like that. The good news about property acquisition is it is an eligible grant category through the state. So when we set aside these funds, they can serve as a match for a future grant application. And I think the theme here is it's important to do something to begin building that reserve for future city councils and communities to have resources to make those acquisition decisions. I was asked repeatedly, where did the $5,000 number came from? That was my recommendation. And as we know with the CIP, we will dial up or dial down as we get there. We did propose to start this in 2025, given how much demand for resources we have on the 23-24 biennium for parks capital projects. So it gives us a little time to think about what that number should be, but that's where that came from. And there's your snapshot of what I just described for property acquisition. By the way, we don't have properties, identified yet. In fact, one of our work plan items for a future year would possibly be to do an island mapping exercise and identify those properties that we would be interested in acquiring, or even where we have essential easements to acquire for future trails. So there's certainly some planning work to be done. But the reserve could still be established in anticipation of that planning work being completed at some point in the future. A couple other projects, and then we are actually done. So these are projects that don't quite fit into the other buckets we just described, and it's about $550,000 in other projects. So the first one is trail intersection crossing improvements at Aubrey Davis Park. Paul, I think you're going to take that one.
Yeah, it's quite simply the Aubrey Davis Mountains to Sound Greenway Trail crosses streets in about 15 different places. We need to look at how those intersections are currently inadequate for handling the trail traffic. That was identified as a project in the Aubrey Davis Park Master Plan. This project would basically address those in some kind of priority order, picking off the most important ones. Some of them have been partially addressed by transportation projects, but designing these with an eye for the particular needs of the trail would be the additional work that these projects would accomplish. Because it's a transportation project, it has possibility of either WSDOT funding or TIP funding.
Thank you. Okay, and I think this is actually our final project in this presentation. This is the Ellis Pond Aquatic Habitat Enhancement Project. And this is, a study to look at how we're managing this facility. I think, Elaine, are you going to take this one, or Paul?
Sure. Yeah, Paul can certainly jump in. Ellis Pond is a really unique type of habitat on the island. It's really our only landlocked pond, and because of that, and because it doesn't have really positive drainage, and water movement through it, it's vulnerable to some issues. So one of those is sedimentation, where essentially we have soil filling it up and plants around the edges that maybe are degrading, and the pond is actually shrinking. The other issue that comes up at this pond is a process called eutrophication, where we see that there are issues with the quality of the water from algae growth and lack of oxygen in the water. And that is exacerbated by, I would say, stationary waterfowl who are really just parking themselves there. And so this is really looking at the habitat needs for this site in a larger context, and looking at how we can be stewarding this better from a stormwater perspective to make sure that we're preserving the health of that really unique spot. So although we've been managing the forest around it for many, many years, this would really be focused more on that open water habitat. And this would be funded through the Stormwater Fund. It's worth pointing out. So this is a $20,000 project.
And what we anticipate then too is that the information that we gain from this project about stewardship would certainly inform future projects or enhancements or other work that we would need to consider. All right, well, we made it to the end of that presentation. I think that was about 90 minutes or more. We have a lot of wonderful projects. Just a reminder, if you're watching this ahead of the February 15th, 2022 council meeting, we are coming to the City Council on the 15th to continue our discussion on the PROS plan. And we anticipate adopting the plan in March, either March 1st or March 15th, depending on how much work we have to do after the 15th. So I hope this was beneficial, and thank you all for listening. And we look forward to receiving your questions and feedback on our draft plan. And thank you again to Elaine and Paul for joining me for the recording.